Hi, and welcome to Theme Park Academy, brought to you in partnership with blooloop. We go behind the scenes of the themed entertainment industry and speak with the people who bring parks, rides, and resorts to life.
And in this episode, we're talking about leadership, generational differences, and how to really train that next generation of leaders in the attractions industry to be the best they can be. Hey, everybody. We're here with Matt Heller, the founder of Optimist Consulting. They work with amusement parks and other attractions around the world. And today I want to talk a little bit about culture, leadership, and our industry and sort of how all those things meet together. But first, before we do that, I want to introduce Matt and kind of get a little bit of, your background, Matt, how you got in the industry and sort of what led you to here.
So what got me into the industry was my mom, because I had been working at a grocery store, all through high school, and was going to go back during college. My mom said, Canopy Lake Park is hiring. I lived in New Hampshire at the time. And she said, that might be a fun place to work for the summer. So I went down there, got a job as a ride operator, and 30 something years later, here I am. I spent about 10 years at Canopy, mostly seasonal, and then a couple of years year round. And really got the bug for the industry. Just loved entertaining people, loved serving people, loved running rides, honestly. And that led to some other opportunities. I moved to Minnesota and worked at the Mall of America because that had just been taken over by Cedar Fair. They had a management contract with Knott's Camp Snoopy. So I had always been impressed with Cedar Point and what they had done. So I thought this would be a great kind of in to be able to get into that company. And I worked there for a little while. That led to a position at Valleyfair, right down the road, literally in Minnesota. And then I kind of got the itch to do something a little different. And I became the general manager of a small family entertainment center in Connecticut. And that's kind of where my career changed paths a little bit, because I had been doing a lot of operational leadership, but also had been doing a lot of training on the side and kind of as part of my role. And I really felt like my passions were evolving, I guess. And I really wanted to get more into kind of back of house people development. And that's where I was able to find a job at Universal Orlando Resort. So for 8 years, I was the senior trainer of leadership development. So I did coaching with leaders. I did classroom training for frontline leaders all the way up through our, managers and directors. And that really got me the taste of what that would be like. And I started presenting at IAPA. And so people started asking me, hey, do you ever do training outside of what you do at Universal? And it was always a little bit of a touchy situation. But saw that there was a need. And in 2011, I decided to step away from Universal. That's when I started Performance Optimist Consulting. And now, like you said, I get to work with attractions all over the world, just making sure that they have the right tools and resources to be successful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think today we're kind of talking about, specifically some generational differences and how that can sometimes come into play and sometimes not. But I think we definitely see it in our industry a lot because we have such a wide age range compared to some other industries I've been a part of. So I wanted us to start ask, in general, what do you think leaders are missing, that when you look at a company that has 4 or 5, maybe even generations working in it, what do you think right now that our industry or industries outside it are missing? And how should we kind of rethink looking at leadership for multi-generational companies?
I love this question because I think the only thing we're missing is the fact that these are all individuals. Everybody that comes to us, whether they're 85 or they're 15, they're individuals. And I think when we try to lump people into sort of those generational labels and we talk about the years and we talk about the names, it really is a stereotype. And I know I've had the experience where I've interacted with people and, back in the day when I first started studying this, and I would say, well, you're a Gen X. And so you're supposed to, behave like this. And nope, that's not how it works. So I think the thing that sometimes we don't have the time for is to truly get to know people as individuals. And I think that really is the way that we can move forward with all the different generations, because you've got people, that may have worked in completely different industries coming to you as a retiree, and they just want to take tickets, or they just want to do something, where they can be outside and be with people. And they're bringing a whole bunch of experience with them. And then you've got that 15, 16, 17-year-old where it's their first job. They don't know what they're really doing. So you're training them, but also they could be paired with some of those folks that have a lot more experience, and they could kind of help mentor them a little bit moving forward. So I think it's really just about treating everybody as individuals and figuring out what's going to make them be the most successful that they can be.
That's great. That's great. And definitely, I think, that individuality is important. Have you talked to leaders from our industry about that? Because obviously, I'd say your leadership in most situations is skew older. Have you talked to people in our industry about that? And how can they do that when obviously we know a lot of them are so stretched for time as it is?
Absolutely. Yes. So the answer is yes. I've talked to a lot of leaders about this. And I think it's partly being creative with your time, but also just recognizing that it's not as difficult or daunting as you might think. I kind of think about like networking at IAPA, right? Mm-hmm. There's tons of people there, and it can be very overwhelming. You walk into a reception and there's hundreds of people there, many of them you don't know, and you're going to have to walk up to somebody and say hello and, break into their conversation. Well, the same thing kind of happens when you have a new team member. You don't know them, they don't know you. But it's up to you as a leader to kind of take that first step and be the person that can open the door and say, you know what, Mark, I know you're new, but here's Adam. Adam's going to help you kind of learn the ropes, if you will, even if he's not your trainer, so to speak, but he's someone that you can make a connection with, and that you can talk to, and you can ask questions about questions to. So I think there's that piece of it. I think the other thing is just recognizing that they're all human beings, whether you're 85 or 15, we're all human beings. And there are certain things that every human being wants. We all want to be connected to other people. We all want to know that we're doing valuable things and that there's a purpose behind what we're doing. What that purpose is, I think, is where you get back to the individuality, because everybody's purpose might be a little different.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I guess riffing off that a little bit, when we think about leadership in our industry specifically, what areas would you see, one or two, that are key to what you would see sort of a watershed in the industry? One or two things that leadership, could do from a philosophical standpoint that you think could really change their day-to-day success?
I don't know if it's philosophical, but I think people need to listen. And I mean, really listen. Like, as I'm talking to both of you on the screen, I see you're at least making, Zoom eye contact.
Yeah.
But I think that's one area, as you talked about time earlier, where we have limited amount of time, no doubt about it, right? And so it can be easy to, look at that spreadsheet on your dashboard and say, well, this is what I have to do. This is what I have to do. This is what the numbers are telling me. That's fine to have that data. But if you're now going out and listening to your people, you may hear a very different story, or you may have very different context around that data that you're seeing on the screen. So I really believe it's important for people to be able to listen, and listen with an open mind, because we don't listen with these. We don't listen with our ears. We listen with our mind. And if we are truly going to individualize our leadership and figure out the ways that we can best help the people and serve the people that we're working with, we have to understand them. We have to be able to listen to what they're saying. And I know both of you know this, but your frontline team members are the ones who know what's going on with the guests, because they're interacting with them every single day.
Yep.
Your frontline leaders know what's going on with your frontline team members, because they're interacting with them every single day. So if we're not out there listening and really taking in that feedback, then all we're doing is looking at data on a spreadsheet, and it's not telling us the whole story.
That's a great point. I think the other thing is, so often now, especially compared to even 10 years ago, where people are tethered to their phones more than ever. And I'm not saying like, oh, they can't get off their phones to social media, but more like we are so accessible 24/7 and have data coming in. If you're a Park GM, you're hearing about all these different things happening. And I think it can be, I'm sure it's really challenging for leaders in our industry, where if it's that July 4th day and everybody's slammed and, your phone just does not stop from emails, text messages, Slack, whatever you're on, or all the above, how do I think from a corporate standpoint, we step back a little bit and think about, putting a hierarchy on those? Because I talk to some leaders sometime and they are involved with the smallest things and the largest things because they're quote unquote all their problem. And have you found any clients working that are really trying to put more of a hierarchy or managerial style on that, so it's not, the leadership quote unquote's responsibility to put out every single fire?
It's such a great point. And so many people come to me and they very proudly say, I'm a firefighter. I put out all these fires. And I said, you really shouldn't be. That's not something you should be super, super proud of. I look at it, if you guys remember the movie War Games, where they talked about DEF CON, right? And I look at it like this. I lay it out like, DEF CON 5, right? That's the least least danger zone.
Yes. It's actually the opposite of what you think, because most people think it's 5 is the worst.
Yeah. So what can be handled at DEF CON 5, right? Who can handle it? If it's not you, there's somebody else you're going to be able to delegate that to. And then now you have an opportunity for training. Now you have an opportunity for development for that person. And then if you get to DEF CON 1, that better be something that only you can handle, right? For example, I know that there are only certain people in organizations that can speak to the media. Okay. So that's a DEF CON 1, right? Only your PR person or only your general manager is going to talk to the media. But guess what? If there's other things like, making the call, I'm just thinking about an emergency situation right now,
Sure.
Making the call, to 911 if something happens in the park. Well, that doesn't have to be the general manager, right? Somebody else can make that call, or, any other situation where you feel like you have to put out the fire. You have to interact with every single guest when they have a complaint. You have to handle every single team member complaint. All those things can be handled most likely by somebody else. And so if you can sort of tier them, TIER, into those DEF CON levels, you can now have a pretty good roadmap of what do I need to handle versus what does a team member need to handle versus what does a supervisor need to handle versus what a manager needs to handle. And then you have a much clearer communication tree for when those things happen. And you're not the one now putting out all those fires. You're going to still be responsible for the people who are putting out those fires, but it's not something that you have to do on your own.
That's really important. And I think also to that point, I talk to a lot of leaders, not necessarily people running the parks, but that mid-level management kind of on the ladder. And I do feel that for them and frontline employees, a lot of them I talk to are also sort of afraid of making mistakes. Like it's, I think, and that is in part because we live in a society where if you do the wrong thing once, you'll get a negative Yelp review or Google review or whatever. And so that collective feedback is out there. And I think understandably that can be kind of scary to work against. But how do you think that you've seen people sort of loosen up even in today to let their people work a bit and have those mistakes? Because, the old adage is when you make a mistake, that's one of your best learning opportunities. But so often I feel that people are just, given limited responsibilities, they make limited mistakes, but then I think on the guest side, then they can't go above and beyond if there actually is something wrong to help the guest get a good solution they're happy with instead of just saying, okay, here's a comp ticket, go away,
Absolutely. And I think the way you get there is that you make mistakes okay to make, but you still have to learn from them. And I think that's where kind of mentorship comes in, from a leadership perspective. So let's say, Adam, you and I are working together and you're one of my team members and, you have a certain amount of autonomy when it comes to, handling a guest complaint, right? And maybe you went above where I thought you should have, right? Instead of replacing their popcorn and their soda, you gave them an annual pass. Right. Okay. So that's probably not the best thing from the company standpoint, maybe not even in line with what that guest might have deserved in that situation, but you really felt it was the right thing to do. You wanted to go above and beyond. You were hearing their story. And now if you and I are having a conversation, I'm not going to say, Adam, you owe us for that annual pass. I'm not going to say, go back to that guest and get it back. I'm going to say, Adam, let's talk about what happened in that situation. Let's talk about, maybe a more appropriate avenue for you to go down in that particular situation. And so now it's a learning opportunity. Did you make a quote unquote mistake according to what you were allowed to do? Maybe, but I'm not going to come down on you for that. I'm going to help you learn so that it goes better next time. Now, if it's a safety issue, that's a different story, right? If it's a judgment issue where you're just saying, hey, I just did this because I thought it was the right thing to do, maybe we need to recalibrate what right is for that particular situation. But I think it's really about, kind of bottom line, making mistakes okay and learning from them. And also from a leadership perspective, admitting when you've made a mistake. I can't tell you how many leaders I have seen try to sweep things under the rug when they have made a mistake, but they don't want to show people that they've made a mistake. And I talk to people all the time and I say, what happens when your leader admits that they made a mistake? Does your trust and respect level go up or down? And 99.9% of the time they say, yeah, it goes up because they're showing that they're a human being. Now, they don't want to make that mistake again, right? And they don't want to see their leader make that mistake again. But if they're human and say, yep, I screwed up, that was on me, but I'm not going to let that happen again, then the trust and respect level almost always goes up.
That's really important, I think. And you touched on safety too. And I do want to bring up something that I think has been really interesting. I saw recently at a theme park, there was, on the news about kids using phones while they were in the station area. And I think kind of a bigger issue that we haven't maybe touched on as an industry yet is that, let's say, compared to when all of us were kids, no matter when that was, when you went to an amusement park, certainly you still had, computers and stuff involved in the ride operations, but nothing like today. And one thing I do see is that we've engineered kind of a lot of things out of I would call them kids, the people running rides today. And so they're really, pushing a button, pulling a restraint, and not doing a lot else. They're having to work really hard. I'm not minimizing that, but compared to like back in the day where you have to pull the brake lever, check the physical restraint, so it wasn't monitored. There just feels like it's a lot more rote, simple thing. So when you think about safety and leadership, how do you talk to people, or what kind of feedback do you hear on how to keep people engaged, especially on the operations side where it's always been a job that is very repetitive, but I feel in today's environment, because of safety, it's actually even more repetitive because there's less they have to do, from hour to hour than they used to.
Well, I think it's a really good point because when you are doing something that is repetitive, it's very natural to kind of tune out, right? Because you're not thinking of it. And I remember back to my early ride operator days when I had to adjust the brake pressure, the air pressure on the brakes, and then pop it at a certain, specific time in order for that car to go through that brake fin at just the right velocity. And that's all now controlled by a computer. And probably from a safety perspective, much more consistent and good for our industry. So what I think we have to do with our team members is give them something else to do. So if you think about a load or unload operator on a roller coaster, for example, like, are there things that they could do to engage the guests that would give them something to do instead of just standing there waiting for the ride cycle to end? You know what I mean? Like, so now, yes, we've taught them the ABCs of running the ride and checking the heights and, checking the restraints and all that kind of stuff. But when that ride is not running or they've got a little downtime, like, let's teach them how to turn around and talk to the guest in the queue. Now some people do that very naturally. People that are more outgoing, they're people, and they just do that because that's who they are as a person. But I think we can give them other things that they can do during that time and engage their brain, because their brain is not as engaged in the operation because, like you said, the automation and the computers have taken that piece out of it. So speaking of phones just for a second, I've always, kind of advocated for people that if you want people to stay off their phone, then you have to be more engaging and more interesting than what's on the other end of that phone.
Yep.
And so that might be, social media, that might be they're checking, their texts or whatever it is. And so if you want to keep their attention, then you've got to be more interesting than what's going on at the end of that phone.
So, Mark, what is your current number one tip that you have for any leaders working in this industry?
I really think it has to do with listening and paying attention to what's going on around them. So I know a lot of people will focus on like one specific area or looking at, one area of their business. Whereas sometimes when you walk a different direction or you walk, you look at something a little differently, then you get to see it a little differently. And I think that's the same thing with kind of listening, because when you're listening to people, when you're listening to what they have to say, it's a lot easier for you to kind of understand the totality of the business. So I would say maybe I can categorize this as just awareness, right? Being aware of what's going around you. Don't bury yourself in your phone. Don't bury yourself in your dashboard. Get your head up, open your eyes, look at what's going on around you.
Yeah, that's great. I think go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say one thing that I've kind of always thought is so important as well, and Matt, you touched on it quite a few times now, is that it's about listening to listen and not listening to respond. And I think so many people are guilty of it. I know I have been in the past where we listen to respond to somebody, and it's so important, isn't it, to actually just take a step back and listen to what is being said, and not just listen with a kind of motivation of saying your piece afterwards.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. In fact, there's a professor that I quote very, very often. His name is Dr. Rick Baumolger, and he teaches at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. And he studies listening. He calls himself the listening doctor. And to your point of listening to listen and not just listening to respond, he says he studied the emotional impact of listening. And he says the emotional impact of being listened to is so close to that of being loved that most people can't tell the difference. So if you are listening to a guest, if you are listening to a team member and you're making eye contact and you've got your phone put away, and I walked into a park president's office one day and he closed his laptop. He's ready to listen, right? So if you know that someone is really listening to you, he says that Dr. Rick says that emotional feeling is so close to love that people can't tell the difference. Well, imagine the connection that you can make with someone when they feel so cared about and they feel so attended to just because you're listening. It's so powerful.
And I think in our industry, the important place to do that too is out of the office. Like, you don't need to be in your office 24/7. Like I see some leaders said, some of the best leaders I see are the ones out walking the parks, talking to the employees, picking up trash, doing the stuff that's not quite as fun when it's hot out and gross out, during the summertime. But those are the people that, you're talking about earlier, kind of those leaders that feel the pulse of the park. And that's definitely when I go to see parks and understand how they're working, but also see their leaders, the ones that are functioning really, really well are often the people that are out in the park as part of their day, once an hour, once a day, whatever that is. Because there's some people that just never leave the office. And unfortunately, some of the parks I see, reflect that style of leadership too.
Oh, absolutely. It's the old manage by walking around, right? I mean, you don't know, especially in our industry, I think, as you mentioned, you don't know what's happening unless you're out there seeing it. And I have absolutely seen the folks like yourself. I've been one of those folks when it's, 90 to 100 degrees, you're walking around. Back when I was a manager, we wore shirt and tie, with my pan and broom, and I'm out there. And but I just don't think, especially for what we do, we are about the guest experience. We are about transforming people from, their regular people as they're driving into the parking lot, and then now they're in this fanciful world that we have created. And you can't get a pulse of what that is about unless you're out there in it.
That's fantastic. I kind of want to change topic ever so slightly if we can, Matt, and just to talk about multi-generational clash of cultures. Now, we know this is not a new topic, but I'd love to know why you think we're talking about this a little bit more, especially kind of within our industry.
Well, I think it's a topic, Mark, that ebbs and flows, quite a bit. And I think you're absolutely right that we are talking about it more, probably because we have had to lean on multiple generations, probably even more than we have in the past. I know, if I go back to when I first started, I could count on one hand the number of people that were like over 60, in the staff. And now it might be half, it might be more than half. And so now you combine kind of the young people that are coming up, the high schoolers, the college age kids that are coming in for a summer job, potentially at a theme park. And then you've got this crowd of people that are a little bit older, and whoever is in charge of managing those folks and leading those folks, they're always looking for something that's going to give them a little bit of a leg up. What's going to give me that push over the cliff, to quote Spinal Tap. What's going to give me that so that I can lead these folks better? And again, it goes back to time. Maybe we're looking for a little bit of a shortcut. Well, when people look at the different generations, and then they see all the videos that are out there, all the books, all the resources that are out there that tell people about the different generations, it's naturally going to come up a little bit more often. But again, I will go back to my experience with this, where I first started hearing about this and really studying it in depth, probably in 2005, 2006. And I had an experience where I had put this information, like we talk about in the traditional generations conversation, the years of that people were born, the names of the different groups. And I put that all into a training program. And I had one guy who was in the front row. This is when I was working at Universal, and he had been in some of my classes before, so we knew each other. So he goes, "Dude," he goes, "that's not me." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you just outlined the years of my birth and where I should fall." But he said, "That does not describe me at all." And so I said, "Okay, well, let me ask the rest of the class. I mean, how many other people feel like this is not resonating with you?" And like half the people raised their hand. And I said, "Okay." So I turned off the projector and we just had a conversation. But I think you see those things kind of, again, ebb and flow through time as people are looking for ways that they can interact with different generations, people of different ages, people of different experiences also. I think that's a big part of it. When you have somebody who's never had a job before, and then somebody who may have been a professional, maybe they were a doctor or a lawyer, and they just want to come in and run a ride, a couple of hours a week just to get out of the house. Like, that's a very broad spectrum of people that you're interacting with. So I think the conversation comes around also when people are just looking for those tools and resources, and sometimes shortcuts.
So Matt, we're kind of in an era now of declining birth rates, and we've got less potential employees that are actually out there, which feeds on really well from what you've just talked about potentially having people who just want to come part-time to get out of the house. Maybe they're retired, for example. What do you think the culture of working in an amusement park, and why do you think it appeals to Gen Z so much?
Well, I think it appeals to young people because it can be a very exciting opportunity, right? Working in a theme park should be fun, right? It should be, you're interacting with people. Now, we all know that sometimes interacting with guests is not the most fun thing in the world, but it's got that potential. I think also working with your friends, is such a powerful tool for recruitment that a lot of people use. But I'm also finding that it has to do with the ability to do things that they may not be able to do at other jobs. For example, when you can, at 17 years old, be in a leadership role, there's not many other places that you might be able to do that. So you're getting some real life experience, some work experience from this particular opportunity. So I think there's that part of it. I think there's also, for a lot of people who are trying to kind of find their way, there's so many different opportunities. You think about big theme parks, and they've got marketing, they've got sales, they've got operations, they've got maintenance, they've got merchandise, they've got food and beverage. I mean, it's a small city. So if you get your foot in the door, you can really try a lot of different things. And, when someone is in a new role, whether it's they've been around for a while or they're in their first job, that can be very attractive, right? If you like working for a particular company, I worked for Universal for 8 years, and I loved it. I loved working there. And if people have that love for that particular company, but they say, you know what, I just want to try something different. I got in operations, but I'm going to school for marketing, and now I want to try my hand at marketing. Well, guess what? You can stay in the same company and explore that, a different career path. So I think that's also something that is very attractive to people.
I think that's fantastic, and I think it kind of brings me on to the next question really well, which is what should employers really know about working with young people, and what should they be thinking of when hiring them? And I'm kind of going to follow it up with another question as well, which is how should these companies try to retain young people? Because, like you say, it's quite competitive now, especially to get the attention of young people to work in these roles. Is there anything specifically that you kind of touched on in training before to try and really hold on to the great talent and kind of nurture them through the process?
So yes, so I think you talked about kind of getting them, on board first, and I think it's really about appealing to what they're trying to get out of it, right? And so when you have so many different people that you are, potentially interacting with, again, it comes back to looking at that one person and making them feel special and saying, yes, this is where I want to spend my time, And again, every human on the planet wants to feel that way. So when you think about the retention of it, when you think about how do we get the good people to stay, or even how do we get the people that are pretty good, how do we take them to the next level? To me, it is, again, about approaching them as an individual, finding out what makes them tick, utilizing their creativity. I think that is such an underutilized skill to, getting people involved and getting people engaged is let them use their mind, let them use their brain, allow them to be creative in some way. There's a family entertainment center that I work with in California, and they've basically turned over their TikTok to one of their frontline managers who just loves doing it. She's probably early to mid 20s, and she's knocking it out of the park, pun intended, right? I mean, she is just really rocking it. And that's not her primary job. Her primary job is doing birthday parties. But she loves the park so much. She loves the environment so much. She's in tune with what people are looking for on TikTok. And so now she's really taken that to the next level. So I think it is about, understanding what makes people tick. And part of that, depending on the size of the organization, is also helping people find those other opportunities. So again, let's say that, I'm working at a park and my leader knows that I'm going to school for marketing. Maybe he initiates a conversation or proactively, initiates a connection with somebody in marketing, say, hey, you're going to be, graduating in a couple of years. These are people you should know now. And so he's making those connections so that I can see that I have a future and see that I have a purpose there. And I think that goes so far beyond, saying, well, you're going to win this in a raffle, or you're going to, get something for it, something tangible. Tangible's nice, but people really respond to the emotional investment. And also when other people care about them, that's what helps people want to stay.
And I love the TikTok example because I think it also shows like a maturity on the part of the leader. We do hope our leaders are mature, but them having the ability to not hold everything, the marketing manager is not holding that TikTok to themselves and saying, well, that's my job, not your job. That whole collaborative thing, instead of the micromanagement approach, more saying, here are opportunities. I do think that younger people are really responding to that now. And instead of clearly defined roles that probably will change anyway within a big corporate environment.
Well, and I think that's where listening comes in as well, because if you are just listening to your team and they may say something, they may have an offhand comment or something like that, and you say, oh, I'm gonna chalk that away because that might help me, interact with them, or I'm gonna watch for an opportunity for them to get involved with that kind of thing. I think that is as much about leadership and developing that team as, teaching them how to run the ride and teaching them about safety and merchandise and all those type of things. I'll tell you a quick story from my days at Valleyfair. There was a group of guys, they were all 15. They all went to school together, and they were all on the ticket taking line back when we all had, big ticket taking lines in our front gate areas. Mm-hmm. And this is before online sales. But I would go out and I would just talk to them, here and there. And they had all been on their 8th grade field trip. And so they went to the state capitol in Minnesota, and they saw the building. And when they walked in, there was this big dome, over the, I don't know what you call it. When you first walk in the foyer, or whatever you call it, there's a big dome. They looked up, there's a big dome. And they said, we're going to start a band and we're going to call it Dome. Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, we keep talking and everything. And well, the stamp that we used to use was a 4-letter word, and it was like lion or whatever it might have been. And they said, hey, can we get a dome stamp? And I said, well, I have to order new stamps every year anyway. So I said, tell you what, if you can come up with 6 other like architectural words that are 4 letters, I'll get you a dome stamp next year. When I order them over the winter, it doesn't matter to me what they say, right? I'll order you a dome stamp. So they came back with door and arch and a couple of other ones that I can't remember right now. But that next year, over the winter, I ordered those stamps with those words on them. And when they came back and they saw that there was a dome stamp, you would have thought that they were made president of the world. You know what I mean? I mean, they were just so excited. And then since we had a different stamp for every day, when it was dome day, oh man, they were standing a little bit taller because it was dome day and they were using that stamp. So it was just a random thing that I had heard them talk about that I could then turn into something that really got them excited about coming to work.
That's great. I love that little story as well. I think one question I've got is, it's quite easy, especially for leaders who have been training these people up. They've been working with them for maybe a couple of years, especially young people. It's so easy to want to retain those people, and merely from a selfish perspective, to keep them amazing talent within your business. Have you got any kind of advice or framework of mindset or anything to kind of take them out of that? Any leaders that are listening right now, we all know how easy it is to kind of keep with that mindset, wanting to retain staff. But again, if they're amazing talent, we want to nurture them to grow and kind of let them on. Have you got any kind of advice for anyone who might be in that position?
Well, you're touching on something that I talk to a lot of leaders about with a lot of different topics, and that's balance, right? Because earlier we talked a little bit about how do we keep those good people, right? Because we want to retain them as long as we can, but there's a balance to letting them go do something else. If you're at a facility, you're at a park that doesn't have room for them in a new capacity, or maybe they just want to do something else. I was talking to somebody today who she was an assistant general manager at a family entertainment center, and she's going to go be a teacher at her son's school. Like, that's a completely different thing that she wants to do. Is she a great assistant general manager? Absolutely. Is the company going to lose a really, really great person? Yes, they are. But we also have to recognize and balance her desires with our desires, right? So she wants to go work in this other place. Great. Let's wish her well. Let's provide a great recommendation, whatever we need to do to help her do that. Because ultimately that mindset is going to come back and serve you in a much better way than trying to keep those people, because ultimately you're going to get to be known, as Adam said earlier, as that micromanager, right? Yeah. And then you're going to hold on so tight that people are going to want to leave anyway. And they're probably going to leave before you want them to leave at that point.
That's fantastic. No, I think that's some great advice for anyone that's listening in that position.
And we are back for our Fast Pass run. We asked our guests a few questions to get to know them better. Matt, we'll start with, I was going to say the easy one, but it's really not an easy one. What would you say is your favorite theme park, amusement park, attraction? It could be favorite. It could be something that's sentimental from your childhood, because I know some people in our industry cannot pick favorites. But, what really speaks to you when you visit a place?
So this is not an easy question at all. I'm gonna pick 2, just because maybe I can. You'll stop me if I can't. Canopy Lake Park, absolutely, as a sentimental favorite, because it's where I started. And there are some parts of the park that are exactly the way they were when I first started working there. And to me, that is so cool. But I also will say that there's a recency bias here also happening, because I got to go to Europa Park for the first time this summer and was completely blown away. I felt like I was in a roller coaster tycoon. I loved everything about it. I loved the energy. I loved the theming. We spent a day and a half there. What I really appreciated was that there were parts of the park that I was literally 10 feet away from the day before, but I had no idea it was there. Like, we were standing in line for one of the coasters, and I looked through some bushes and I said, oh, that's where we were yesterday, but we had no idea that this part of the park was there. So it's an amazing property, and I can't wait to go back.
Great answers. Yeah, Europa is very cool, but I do love Canopy. Just it has that charm that they've never really lost from being a trolley park. You know, it is amazing. So many parks go through a lot of different metamorphoses, but Canopy Lake still feels like Canopy Lake in a good way, not in a stagnant way, but it's still feels very fresh while being very traditional at the same time.
100%. Absolutely.
The second question that we have for you, Matt, is what is your favorite ride or favorite attraction within a theme park?
I'm going to go with the one that pops to my mind first every time that this question is asked, and it's Fury 325 at Carowinds. I love the speed. I love the power. I love the airtime. It is completely rewritable. A couple of years ago, it was on my Coaster Nerd Con trip, and my Coaster Nerd buddies and I rode it 20 times in a row. It's just such an amazing ride.
Also a solid answer. All right, last one. This is actually my favorite one that we've been asking our guests on the show. And kind of what's a key trend over the next 5 years you see, affecting in a good way, bad way, our industry as a whole? Like, what do you think is one thing that's really going to change the way we do business?
I think that it's kind of twofold, because it's partially the hyper personalization that we're finding, but also that we still crave and need to do things as a group, right? And create connections with people. So I think you might start to see things like the Netflix experience, Netflix House, right? Where you've got these different kind of niche experiences where they're very personal, but they're also things you're doing with other people. Maybe some of those more small scale things. As much as I love Epic Universe, as much as I love big theme parks, I think you're also going to see smaller, I'm just going to say it, more manageable attractions that might pop up where, again, you're going to have personalization, you're going to have things that you can do together, but also things that from an operational standpoint aren't so unwieldy as, an Epic Universe, because it's massive and I love it and I can't wait to go back. But I also think that some trends in the industry might be for smaller, more manageable attractions that people can do when they have just maybe a couple of hours, and things like that. So I think that's something that you might see a little bit more of.
I like that a lot. And I think also, so many times in our industry, I think people think you start big, but unless you have pockets like Disney Universal, I think, most of our successful investments over the last 50 years have really started relatively small and grown over time. Knoebels was not the park it is now 100 years ago. And I know obviously being public companies, people look at the metrics very differently than they used to. But I think as an industry, sometimes we need to step back and just say, we need time to grow this. It is not going to just burn the house down on day one. It needs a decade or two to really become a part of, the fabric of community, a tourist attraction, whatever the goal is there. Absolutely.
And, one other area of the business I'll mention here really quickly is agritourism, right? When you have a pumpkin patch or you have a corn maze, and then you start building attractions kind of around that, there's small amusement parks that they're putting up. Yep. So it's really fascinating to see how those are growing as well.
For sure. Actually, we sold a coaster to a pumpkin patch last year. I mean, I use the term pumpkin patch loosely because they are a small to mid-sized park, really. But yeah, their core was pumpkins, and it is amazing how that segment's just grown over the last few years.
What's really interesting, especially about that segment, is the fact that they can keep their overheads massively reduced. They've got huge influx of volume when it comes to seasonal activities, and actually the ROI for parks like that is significant, and a lot of the time it's actually a lot stronger in terms of business cases than theme parks are for attractions. I completely agree, Matt. I think we're definitely going to see a kind of boom in the industry, and I think we're already seeing it. I think it's just going to get even bigger.
Awesome. Well, that is our show for today. Thank you, Matt, so much for joining us. Tell everybody, whether it's socials, website, LinkedIn, whatever you want, where people can find you online.
Probably the best place to go is my website, performanceoptimist.com. You can get to everything that I do through there. You can find my social handles. You can find the Attraction Pros podcast, if I could do a little plug for that.
Of course.
And everything else that I do for and with and within the industry. So performanceoptimist.com.
And I'll just second Matt's plug there. If you are, especially if you're a younger person getting into the industry or wanting to learn about a lot of different operational viewpoints and aspects, Matt and Josh's podcast is fantastic. Highly recommend it. They have a few more listeners than us too, so please don't everybody go there. But it is really a great resource, especially for aspiring leaders in our industry. So you can find Mark on LinkedIn and myself on Instagram at Rollercoaster Sales Guy, as well as LinkedIn. And as always, thank you so much to the blooloop team at blooloop.com. And they have everything that you need for news, and they are a huge host and supporter. So we really appreciate all their input. Until next time, thanks for joining us.